Hi everybody, my name is Sophie McDowell and I'm here to talk to you today about my art thesis. I'm a senior at Guilford College where I've majored in printmaking and minored in music. And for this past year I have been working on a series of prints called In Between Land. And you'll see some of them behind me. So I'm going to step aside for a second, let you have a broader view of some of my pieces. This work is inspired from my dreams and memories, images within my dreams and memories. I'm very interested in the idea of a liminal space. So liminal means something that's not this and not that. It's neither here nor there. I tend to think of a hallway between two rooms. It's the in-between, and it kind of exists as its own thing. So I am interested in how this place in my brain or my heart or wherever it is that holds all of these memories, all of these dreams and moments, some of which happened and some of which haven't really happened. I'm interested in how that can exist in this world. And so I'm going to go into a little dream that I had a couple months ago. I dreamt that I was at the threshold of my childhood home, right at the doorstep, and I was able to open the door with my key, and I walked in to the house, and I had this sudden realization that I no longer lived there anymore. It was no longer my home, which is true in real life. It's no longer my home. But in the dream, I quickly stepped back and tried to close the door. And once I did try to close it, the door completely fell off of its hinges and was warped so that when I tried to place it back in the door frame, it wouldn't fit. And I think that's a pretty, pointed example of liminal and of this idea of being in the in-between. I was literally caught. I couldn't go into the house because it wasn't mine, and I couldn't leave because I felt this responsibility to kind of fix what I had done and to kind of help the situation in some way. And I woke up from that dream and realized that, the word in between is how I want to represent these characters. I want to represent them in moments of transition. So you'll see a figure removing her clothes or putting on, depending on how you look at it. You'll see a child clutching a crow so that it can't fly away, but it's in the middle of flight. And you'll see birds in flight and birds that are sitting and about to fly. All of these images exist together in this kind of contradictory moment of stillness versus movement. I'm fascinated by contradictions and how two things that are seemingly opposites can actually exist at once and can exist together. And that kind of brings me to the definition of home. I realized after a certain point that I was making work about home, and that definition seems to be changing constantly. Home means something different to me every minute. And so I would ask myself, is home the house that I grew up in? If that's true, does that mean I don't have a home anymore because I don't live there? Is home where my grandparents lived or where my parents now live? And can home be represented in a certain type of bird that I used to want to play with when I was younger? Can it be represented in a certain type of flower that would grow in my grandparents' backyard? And I think home can exist in all those things. And then I got to the point where I realized that maybe the closest thing that I have to home, the closest thing that I have ownership over in this entire existence is my body. And my body is kind of this vessel for home. But it's also true that my body is constantly changing, and I will not have this body forever. just like I didn't have my 4-year-old body forever. We go through so many stages of changing every day, and I'm fascinated by that, how I can exist as this person, Sophie, and yet I'm still constantly changing. So that's a little bit of insight into the title and into the general themes. I wanted to touch on one character. I have snakes depicted a couple times throughout my body of work. And snakes kind of represent, to me, they represent change. They represent rebirth and this idea that they can shed their skin and suddenly they're born new again. I think they also represent the fear of change, the fear of transitions, but also the dire need for change and the dire need for certain transitions to happen in order to keep living and to keep growing. Again, coming back to this contradiction of feeling afraid to leave the past, but afraid to not go into the future. You know, it's kind of a sense of being stuck in shock, and I think I'm trying to convey that through this world a little bit. Color is extremely important to me, and it's important to this work as well. I adore vibrant colors, and I just love how pleasing certain colors feel. Like a hot pink Barbie color versus a lilac color versus turquoise blue, and I love how all of these things can mix together and be pleasing to the eye. I also admire how color in this body of work kind of abstracts these images even more, you know? So like these colors are not true to what a human body might look like, you know? These colors are not true to what an actual chickadee bird might look like, you know? So I appreciate that through my use of color I can abstract these characters further and further imply that this is a fantastical world. This is not a world that is born from this reality. You know, it's very much its own thing and can certainly exist as its own thing. And on that note, I feel very connected to the printmaking process. That feels like a huge part of why I make art. And I feel so lucky to have made this work and to have had access to the print shop at Guildford and the printing press. In one day working in the print shop, I could make probably like 3 to 5 of these kind of medium-sized prints. I could probably only make 1 to 2 of the larger size prints with the help of the printing press. And since COVID has hit, I have not had access to that printing press. And I've had to do my work by hand. And so that means I'm carving the exact same way that I was earlier. I am inking up the blocks the exact same way almost. It's just instead of putting the blocks on the piece of paper through the press, I am acting as the press and pressing down with my hands and tools to make the ink sink and soak into the paper. And that's been a huge change for this work and has meant that, you know, I can't make as much at one time. I can probably only make 1 print a day. It's very like physically taxing. But you know, I do appreciate how it's gotten me closer to this process, and it's made me really appreciate my work even more. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to step back one more time to give you one last look. And again, thank you so much for listening to a little bit about this whole process. Have a good one.